Kicks in. Welcome to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission. This is your gateway to insights and inspiration as we strive to be better together. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. Super excited. We got Tip rejoining us, we got Pat rejoining us, we got Jason rejoining us, we got Sean back from his vacation abroad, and I am stoked to be back here live. So let's get some intros out of the way and then we'll get kicked off. Oh, actually, before we do that, while I'm excited, you should be too, making sure that you're hitting all the buttons. And they moved my button thing. Oh my goodness. We're just going to move on. Here we go. Let's do it right there. Make sure like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. That way you get your emails whenever we go live. Of course, Fridays for The Collective and Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. Now we can get into some intros. Tip, you're on top, 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff.
My name's Tip Cullen. I'm a former Royal Marines Commando and I'm now an actor. And I've got a big movie coming out in January. So if I get a chance to drop it, I will.
Bam. I like it. I'll drop it for you right now. Sunray. I'm super stoked. Cannot wait to watch that. It's going to be awesome. Pat, how about yourself?
Pat Miller, Canadian military, 20 years, infantry, CAN-SOFCOM, and now I'm a armourer and military advisor in film and professional photographer.
Like it. Jason, how about yourself?
Yeah, Jason Cheney. Spent all my adult life military and law enforcement. Got out of doing that, went to the training side. Now I do sales and night vision training for a night vision company. Got some personal stuff coming out this year that I'm you and I kind of talked about it offline, but yeah, that'll be going on next year. But yeah, right now just training and selling night vision.
Love it. Awesome. Sean, how's it feel to be back in the mountains?
It's good. It's good to get out of the concrete jungle. I mean, I love Thailand, and I really love Thailand, but we spent a lot of time in Chiang Mai, which is a fairly big city. So lots of scooter noise, lots of traffic, lots of bandwidth going on. And it's good to be back in the mountains where it's a little bit of less of a sizzle in the air. I've got to say this though. It's great to be on the podcast again because it feels like it's been frickin' forever since we went live. And the new intro and then you doing your little subscribe things and all of the routine. I've missed the routine. It's good. And we got a great panel of guests on today. So, man, it's good to be back.
It really is. I was thinking about it yesterday and I was like, oh, I'm getting all pumped up. You're ready for these conversations. And I missed having these deep kind of philosophical discussions. Just the thought process involved in them is really awesome. So I'm excited to get into this. Now we're going to be talking about putting down the sword. And I sent you guys that email last night and I'm wondering what your guys' first thoughts. What does it mean to you personally to put down the sword? Tip, and hit you first. What do you got?
Well, for me, it was, I never wanted to put down the sword as such. The only thing I ever wanted to be was a Royal Marines Commando. And once I got to, I think I was about nearly 30 years into my career, I went from rank of Marine, right up to every rank up to captain. And I was sitting in front of my computer screen and I'd just come back from operations in Afghanistan. And it's just a mere thought. I was lucky enough to have survived and spent most of my career as a commando in the front line doing what I'd done and as a mountain leader as well. And so when I was sitting in front of the computer screen, I thought, this ain't me. This ain't me. And that was my deciding point to put down my sword. But if you think putting down the sword is more of a practical thing. But what I realized is the importance of the storytelling on who we were as soldiers or as Marines for that whole period, and the highs and lows and the characters that we'd lost and the characters we gained throughout that period it was all about the stories. So I thought that was my path. So I've put the sword down, but the sword's still with me in the storytelling and in the creativeness that I'm doing. So I think it's a very important part of me. But in a way, I'm glad that maybe because I have got reading glasses now, and maybe I'm not that steely-eyed, youthful, like, wearer of the green cloth of death. Now I'm, you know what I mean? I'm an actor. Is that a bit of a wuss, is it? Or what do you reckon? You know what I mean? But that's it. So the sword is down. And unlike yourself, not on your bed with all the rest of your weapon systems, because you're Canadian and that's what you do. Mine is fully, sort of probably in some armory, in some commando unit somewhere.
This is a great place to start. I'm glad you brought that up. Jason, what are your thoughts on this? Oh, you're muted there.
Got it. Yeah. So for me, I looked at it a couple of different ways, and I think that I've already kind of figured out the hack for the way this show tends to run. So what I'll do is I'll go and give a couple of broad topics, and then we'll dive into them. But kind of like he just said, the putting the sword down professionally, which is something that I've done, and I didn't want to either. But it's you kind of, like he said a little bit, was you put it down, but you put it down professionally, like it's as if it stands for an authority or who it's kind of your identity, but you don't ever really put it down. Like you said, with the storytelling, and as I've moved forward with training and trying to help people out, you're carrying it, but maybe like a smaller sword, maybe just as important, but you've laid it down professionally, and it is a hard thing to do. Kind of where I was thinking of it, though, on a couple of different levels, was putting down the sword between you and an individual. And I know that you and I talked, I guess it was last week. I have recently done this where I was able to put down a sword and kind of mend a relationship that had meant a lot to me throughout my professional career. We just kind of went separate ways, and we were both able to kind of put that sword down and come back together and work things out, and we're fixing our relationship. The other way I looked at it was putting down the sword, something that I've noticed in this industry, that at least that I'm in, and Isaac and I were actually talking about this the other day. We're kind of in an industry, with him being fitness and with me being in training, we're all out there to help each other. But for some reason, a lot of people in our space, they don't like to put their sword down and just, hey, how can we all get better? And instead of cutting each other, keep cutting each other down and going after each other, let's say we're all kind of looking towards the same goal. Maybe we might have some differing opinions, but let's put the sword down and try to make everybody better. So those are my broad generalized ideas that I had for when you put that out, but we'll see where it goes from there.
I love it. Pat, what are you thinking?
It's funny because when you give out a topic like that, it's such a broad thing, right? And like, yeah, we can talk about like, within the organization, professionally, but obviously like it's metaphorical, right? And so passing or putting down the sword, it's an interesting topic to dive into, and I think it'll be a great conversation because I don't think we ever put it down, right? And sometimes is it that we're passing the torch? You know what I mean? So, mentoring, teaching, how to wield a sword, in a better way. Because, it doesn't have to be like about violence, but it is about like, our internal struggles and our push forward, whether it's coming from an organization like the military or just morphing it into our new profession.
You guys are hitting on all the topics I had listed here. I am loving this, Sean. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking a few things. I hadn't given it much thought before we started the show because I kind of wanted to see where it would all shake out. I love the fact that Jason is already analyzing the hack for the show at the front end. That's freaking awesome. And something that Jason said was I don't know if he was mending a relationship or strengthening up a past relationship. But until he said that, I hadn't considered this as a potential tangent to the topic, and that is something that's thrown out there, and it's often graphically represented as two swords, cross swords, and that is that classic iron sharpens iron sort of scenario. And you can put down your sword, or you can combine swords, and that iron sharpening iron is what we're all doing every day, as long as you're surrounded by the right amount of people, the correct people. And so that was something that bubbled up in my head, is that iron sharpens iron aspect to the swords. For myself, I don't think I ever put down the sword metaphysically. I only put a sword back in the day down and picked up other swords along the way. And it's interesting that just before we started the show, Pat and I jumped into, that 60-second, hey, let's talk about photos, because he's a rad photographer, and I shot a bunch of photos over in Thailand. And out of those 15,000 images that I shot, I found myself getting better and better with the camera. This new Sony A6700 that I've got, the body. It's new to me, and I just didn't understand all of the functions, and I wasn't moving very fast with it. But as I got more and more used to it, the weapons platform, as I started thinking of it, became more and more familiar to me. And so pretty soon I was holding my camera, and I noticed that, hey, I'm holding it like a trigger. And so my finger was off the trigger, and when I would be ready to shoot, it'd go straight to the shot, and then it'd be off the trigger. And then I started moving like this, and then I was starting to scan over my shoulder to look to see where I was starting to move. Then I had tactical movement as I was shooting with my camera. And so I think that when we all, as young men, picked up that sword, we learned how to wield it. We learned how the various movement patterns that you can do with a sword. We never forget that, just like riding a bike. And I think that plays out into the rest of our life. The camera over in Thailand was just an extension of the first time that I picked up a freaking FNC1A1 way back in the day as an assault rifle. So I think that the young man lessons that we learned when we were holding that sword, for me, I've just simply played it out in every other aspect of my life, and we'll call it metaphysically. But I find that the practical or the physical applications of it still fold into my martial arts, into my riding, into cameras, into all things in my life. So I'm not sure I ever put the sword down. I put down some tools. I'll put it across that way.
I'm loving where this goes, and Tip and I were chatting beforehand before everybody else jumped in, and I was referencing, that old Western trope of hanging your rifle up over the mantelpiece. And that doesn't mean that you're ever putting it away. It doesn't mean that you're like, you never touch it again, even though you may never touch it again, but you're just putting it aside. I think this is an interesting part to it. And I want to go back to your point here, Sean, about especially for young men, when we first pick up that sword, there seems like, from what I've understood from listening to all these other people, is that there's almost a fight ingrained in us as young men, that as we grow up, we kind of seek out a fight. We look for a sword to pick up and find purpose in that. So I'm wondering, why do you think that is? Why do you think that is so deeply ingrained in us? And I guess, how do we guide others forward so they're not being deconstructive? Let's put it that way. Jason, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
You took me away from where I was going to go. Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, so I'm kind of, it's the way you worded it. I'm kind of going through that right now with my son. He's 7 and is about a month into his very first wrestling season. So, I'm kind of trying to find my way through explaining to him, as we talk about the social norms of not fighting and being polite and stuff. It's hard to say, okay, hey, it's going to be different here, because you see a move and it we've all seen violent encounters. When you watch 7-year-olds wrestle, it doesn't look violent at all. And so you kind of look back on picking up that sword and I know for me, it came out of it's just what it was my family, the first responders, military. I think that plays a part in it. But I think also a lot of us have that you know, you hear it a lot from different types of people. Mostly it's like that protector mindset. You know, in law enforcement, we looked at it as, hey, I'm here to solve your problem, and I'm good at solving other people's problems, and you could consider that a character flaw for some people. But yeah, I think as a young person, I think it's your environment. I think it's truly, you know, if you've been through you know, something hard, something you played sports, you did anything competitively, I think that it just gets more ingrained in you as you move towards looking for another mission in life. And at least for me, that's where it kind of led me to that military and first responder thing. Number one, my environment. Number two, it's that protector, you know, helping people, plus the new challenge, the excitement, the adventure. And I think that, you know, when you, like for my son, he's picking up his sword for the first time, and for me, it's, you know, it's okay. I want to go out and find that sword that, you know, like Sean was talking about it being a camera. And you know, for most of us, you know, the analogy was used in the firearms profession. You know, what's the next challenge, the next adventure? I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm kind of rambling a little bit on that one, but
All
yeah,
good.
for me, that's where it came from. For me, I'm sure it's so different for most people, but
I like the idea of the environmental angle. That's really fascinating. Tip, what do you got?
Yeah, for me, like, you know, just that simple thing we said earlier on. You said, "Oh, look, I've got my rifles on the thing." Like, it's different. We're different. We come from different parts of the world. We're very, very similar culturally, and that's sort of. I grew up in a society and a culture very much like yourselves, where you guys are living, where, you know, those a rifle or the protector, the armed forces, whether it be, I mean, again, I grew up in Ireland, remember, so you could be, is that the rebels, or is that, you know, or is it the you know, forces of the crime? You know, I mean, but both sides, it was a soldier, it was the picking up the sword, wasn't it? And they're both oppositions, but culturally they're very the same, and, you know, and all that sort of stuff. So I think culturally and socially, it's always been there. But also for young men, like I can only say, as I have, you know, I'm a man, so when I was growing up, it was all part of that, you know, the attraction for me to join. I just had this destiny that I wanted to become a Royal Marines Commando, which it is not like the run of the mill thing where I came from, but that's what I thought I had to do, and it was about the picking up the sword, but doing it for a sense of good. Because when you pick that sword up, the responsibility you hold by having that system, or a weapon system, and remember, like, you know, Sean said, like different other weapons, or you pick different swords up now, but none of these other things are lethal. None of these other things are purely made to kill living things. You know what I mean? So the responsibility you hold as a young person with that sword, and as long as you hold that, whether you're in law enforcement or in the armed forces, that responsibility as a human being is massive. So you think of the life experience you get having the responsibility of being able to deliver lethality, and then follow that spectrum all the way back to helping people in, you know, natural disasters, helping all these things, all those life experiences you get in that career while you're holding that sword, which is the responsibility which will give death. Nobody has that responsibility, do they? Or, and I say, apart from armed forces or law enforcement. So I mean, you as a person, when you finally do lay down the sword, which again you've been influenced because you see it as a safe thing to protect, to look after your culture, to look after the things that you love, your family. That's all part of it. That's why you hold that lethality and that you're responsible for. So it's a massive commitment. So when you lay down that sword, it's like we said, I don't think you ever will lay the sword down. You'll do different things. For me, I dress up and tell stories now, don't I? That's what I do. I'm an actor. But I'll always be a Royal Marines Commando. That's it. That's the way I've been made, and I'm glad that's what I did, because of all those responsibilities as a human, as a young man, right up until I was a senior lad. That responsibility you had all through those years, you think the life experience, the value then you become to your community because of that depth, and because you understand. Remember, and not many other sort of, like, shall we say, occupations. In fact, not nearly any of them have to have the potential to deliver lethality. You know what I mean? Think of it, there's a very finite amount of people that we see, so we say, morally responsible enough to kill somebody. You know what I mean? It's a spooky little thing. So when you put down that sword, when you put it down, you've had a spectrum of your life where you've held the ultimate responsibility. That's what I see. So it's definitely cultural, social, and maybe destiny, that made you want to do it. But you also, yeah.
I like that. Sorry to cut you off. The responsibility of life and death. That is a fantastic point, because really that is what you're carrying by taking up that sword. And a beautiful point. Pat, what do you got?
Yeah, no, I love where this is going. And we talk about, you're talking about the younger generation, younger men. And I don't know if it's hormonal, societal, cultural, all both, it's all one. We have, but are we born into it? Like, because I look at, my younger brother, exact opposite of me. I don't think that there's a sword that he would really wield. I mean, and he likes to program computers and play video games, and he's he's an adult. And I'm not bashing on my little bro. He's and super insanely smart, but there's not a fight in him. So are some of us more drawn to the sword than others, right? And we've used the military to satisfy that. So we've used the military to satisfy that drawn to the sword, to the fight, to all that stuff. And then is it as we get older, as older men, we start to refine that and use it and shift it, not only in our own lives and build that precision into where we steer our lives, but also, again, I'll probably go back to mentoring, how we mentor those young men now, right? How we guide those young men not to go into, say, use it for crime and violence, but to steer towards protection or steer towards the betterment of society.
You guys are just hitting. We're already striking gold. We're 20 minutes in. We're hitting gold. Sean, what do you got?
So based on a couple of things, one that Tip said, and he was talking about responsibility holding the sword. And so I think that's quite fascinating, that responsibility, whether you choose the responsibility or not. And so I'm going to state that and attach to it that when you join the military, there's all kinds of roles, and some of those roles have more responsibility than other roles. But within that community, everyone's got a certain amount of responsibility, and that responsibility has a certain amount of consequence. And so that's what I find fascinating about the military community, is the connection between responsibility and consequence. Because there's loads of industries out there that have quote unquote responsibility, but they don't have the consequence actions often attached to it, or the importance of understanding that your actions have consequence. In the modern world, I find that there's less consequence for the standard issue actions out there versus, of course, in the military, where whatever you do has ripple-on effect of consequence. And as a young NCO or non-commissioned officer, if you're not doing your job well that day, the consequences might ripple out 4.5 years from now through those poor lessons that you passed on, or through that poor leadership that you demonstrated, or the wrong things that were taught at the time. Even the smallest, almost insignificant actions within the military will have follow-on consequence somewhere down the line. And so those consequences can be life or death, unlike any other industry out there in the world. And so I find that to be interesting, that responsibility is probably one of the strongest markers within the military of shaping a young man. And so that responsibility, I guess, plays out into something that Pat said, and that is that his younger brother is not like him, and they're different. But it made me think back to Sparta as an example. loads of young men probably weren't suited to be a Spartan warrior. But guess what? You didn't have a frickin' choice. You had to be in the game, period. And so, you know, Pat's brother has the luxury of not having to pick up a sword because Pat, his brother, picked up a sword. And so someone has to pick up a sword, because if no one's picking up a sword, then the consequence of that as a country are dire. And so I find a interesting little sweet spot there between the responsibility of picking up the sword versus not needing to pick up the sword. Maybe we can think about that a little bit.
Ooh, that's a great lane to go down. And before we do that, I just want to hit on a couple of these comments real quick. John Menard joined us. He says, if it's in you, you're unable to lay the sword down. It's forever a part of you. And that's an interesting point. He also says, welcome home, Warren. Good to see you. Dan jumped on here. He says, 15 years post-retirement, and I still do full 360, knowing my primary, secondary escape routes, every room I walk into and see everyone in the room. Never goes away. Do not call yourself a peaceful man if you've never known war. Without that experience, you are not peaceful. You are harmless. Thank you for what you're doing. And, you know, this brings up a really interesting point, because there are many people that have laid down the sword after service. And I'm wondering, do you think that perhaps laying that sword down could feel like a betrayal of who we are, what we served for, what we did, the people that we served with? What do you guys think? Pat, I'm going to come to you first.
Wow. You kind of caught me off guard there, because I'm just kind of digesting that whole thought. Yeah, maybe just go somehow. I'll come back to
Raj,
me.
I'll come back to you. No worries. Tip, what do you got?
Well, exactly. I mean, for me, it is the bizarre thing. When you're young, your body is a completely different, you know, it's a different beast. You were a different beast. You're a youthful, I used to call it, you're young, dumb, and full of cum, aren't you? You're like that. You're like, just, you're mad. You got testosterone dribbling out of your nostrils. You've got the fight in it for everything, and you want that. And that energy, that wonder, that chemistry in your body that's going mental, and you physically just push your body to the absolute limits, is incredible. And I know, like yourself, Sean, you get older, and other people do still keep on, but the intensity is not at the same level. It is not, you know what I mean? It's not. So when I was getting towards the end of my sort of career as a Royal Marine, I was like going, you know, I've got reading glasses on. Trying to call a fire mission in on a map when you've got to put reading glasses on in a contact is not a perfect scenario. You know what I mean? So there's certain things that maybe when you're more youthful. So, and that's natural. It's not, I haven't got bad eyesight or anything. It's because I'm getting old, because I'm in my 50s. So your body changes. I become a lot more emotional now. There's things now that, you know, I was watching Cross of Iron coming back from Austria skiing last week, and I watched it. It was downloaded on Apple. And there's moments in that where I was crying, because I was thinking about my mates that I lost in operations and that, and how they were like brothers. And I'm feeling even emotional now. And that's how I've changed. I wasn't like that when I was young, but I am now. And I'm glad I'm like that. I love being like that. So that transition of, I haven't let anyone down by putting that sword down. I'll always feel and you must admit, when the balloon goes out, if things go to total war and you've got to protect everything that you love and your way of life, we'll all fight to death anyway. So we'll all pick a sword up. It's just I won't be as effective, I don't think, as I used to. I'll be a very, very weary, knowledgeable soldier, but even the way tech's moving forward, the way the battle's moving forward, if you're out of uniform for maybe 6 months now, you're way behind the bar curve, because it's moving. You know, the battlefield 3 years ago isn't the battlefield today, and that's quite spooky, isn't it? How many sort of, like, you know, in that short period, how we've moved on, even since I started doing these podcasts. In that short period, how warfare has changed. You know what I mean? Because we were talking about Afghan, we were talking about this. Afghan's changed. It's back to Taliban now. Whoa, Ukraine, drones, this, fire. I mean, it is mad. So that sword, be very, very wary. And like you say, because we change, and I become a big emotion. Not just because I'm an actor. I love being emotional. I love getting my grandkids and having big hugs with them and cuddles and things out there. But I was a young Marine. I was kids, wasn't it? You know what I mean? But you just move on with life, and life is wonderful. So it's one of those things that I like the journey. I'm proud of my being the holder of a sword, and I'm glad that I've put it down. But like these people are sending messages in, we're always going to be there. We're always going to have it. You know what I mean? And we're hopefully we're never going to need it though. You know, that sort of thing.
I'm in total agreement with that. The idea of being able to put it down, but keep it within reach, right? That it's available if you need it, but it's not something that you need to carry every day, at least. Jason, what are you thinking?
So when you said betrayal, to me, I think that, you know, as we were talking about responsibility before, I think that, you know, you can't look at it as a betrayal. I'm sure that some people do, in the sense that, you know, they're not able to, they feel like they've lost touch. They feel like they've, you know, lost a part of them. And I think we could go into a whole completely episode on its own about the fact that people make it their identity, and how that can be an issue if you don't have hobbies like fishing or something else to do. But you know, that's neither here nor there. It's kind of a part of it. But to me, I think also the responsibility, you know, when you choose to whether you choose to or not, let's put it that way, because you know, in the law enforcement side, you know, that's one of the big things that I'm a proponent for, is that sometimes we just have to identify those that don't, they shouldn't have that responsibility. You know, and kind of being able to sort through that and say, hey, this is the kind of person we're looking for, and this is who we need to do this job, and who we would like to give this responsibility to. And that's you know, that's a piece of it. But you know, then as you, okay, I have the responsibility, I've carried the sword. You know, when you get to that point, a very good friend of mine, a mentor, you know, he's in his 50s now, and he's still one of the operators on the SWAT team that I was a part of. And his measuring stick is when he can't complete the physical fitness standards the same way that he always completes it, in the same as the 18 to 25-year-olds. Now in Missouri you have to be 21, but that's the standard that we use. So when if I'm not able to compete with and maintain the standard of the most fit youngest guy on our team, that's when I'm gonna call it quits. But then you look at that and say, okay, I've decided to move on, but you know, now I want to maintain a responsibility of how can I still help? What sword can I hold? You know, you may not be able to be an operator. You might not be able to be up there doing the job that you were doing, but what support role can I offer to the guys that are carrying the swords? You know, you kind of go to that support role. And I think that's where, you know, like for me, you know, it was hard for me to do that. But I now see myself as a support role. You know, we talked about the battlefield changing, just keeping myself current and being able to help those guys think through problems logically, and you know, all the different types of training and stuff that we do. You know, keeping myself current, but knowing that I'm in that support role now. And I think that goes back to, again, like I was saying, the responsibility side of what we were talking about, is when, you know, when am I being irresponsible by not taking the chance to put that sword down and jump into that support role? And you know, that's just kind of, as I thought about that, it shouldn't feel as a betrayal. You know, if a lot of guys think they're abandoning everybody, and you know, no one's going to call them anymore. And I mean, I can tell you, after going through it, the ones that matter will. And you know, to me, it's not a betrayal. I think as long as you maintain that support role and find something to do that makes you feel like you're still a part of the team, whatever team that is, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah, I really like that. The ability to to step back without like jumping off a cliff. You can just take a step back off that line. I love that. Pat, now I'm coming back to you. What do you got?
Yeah. Well, I think it was the word, again. Yeah, like for a couple of us, the word betrayal was kind of like what hit me kind of offside there, because I'm like, betrayal. I'm like, that's such a strong word. And I think if that's the way you feel, that's a fatal mindset. You can't have a mindset that you lay down a sword, it's some sort of betrayal. That's something that has to, well, you have to work on. And I think that's why it hit me so hard, because I'm like, how do I put this into words? Um, Whether you choose to put it down and you see it as you're completely putting down the sword, you have to be at center with yourself and be cool with that. Like, that has to be something that you should be proud of what you did, proud that you picked up that sword, proud that you did all those things. take all those lessons that you gain from it and be at ease with that. I think that inflexibility of thinking of it as betrayal could be quite fatal for, you transitioning into anything else. You can't think that way, and you have to think of it as like max flex, right? You got to have that maximum flexibility. Either you put it down and you're going on with a different direction of your life, and that you can put it in that perspective, or you're going to shift it. You're going to shift it as you're picking up that sword. It doesn't matter if it's an internal battle, an internal sword that you're picking up to better yourself and better your profession, your life, or it's moving on to a different organization or a different role.
Yeah, I was saying this earlier. It's not so much even about putting the sword down as it is pointing it in another direction sometimes, and I think that's an important piece of this too. Sean, what are you thinking?
Like the fellas, I kind of reacted a bit. Whoa, betrayal. Wow, that's a strong word. It is a strong word. Not, in hindsight, I kind of like it. I like the fact that it's such a strong word because it causes you to get context. Like compare the word betrayal against, just ease it back, bro, max flex, bro. And so betrayal is so strong that you have I had an almost instant response to it. Like, whoa, that is so freaking strong. But that makes it easy for me to move into my comment, which is this, that I think in order to understand betrayal, you have to have context. And so that means looking at your life as a whole and understanding what you've done, the totality of your life to that point, and what you want to do in the future. That's called context. And so who are we in the moment? That's all defined by us. What do we want to do in the future? Well, that's defined by us. And understanding those two states of existence, that is the context. So if you feel any form of betrayal of yourself, it's because you've got your context warped or distorted or messed up. And that's for you to figure out. And if you can't figure out the idea of you betraying yourself, then look around for people who will sit down with you and help you understand where you're at in life and where you can go. The most capable man or person in the world, I think, at some point in their journey of life, will get to a point where they feel like maybe they've lost their way a little bit, just a little bit, or maybe a lot. Either way, it's that moment where you get context. But you'll only get context if you sit down and think about where you were, where you are now, and where you want to be. That's past, present, and future. And so this idea of betrayal, if you can't figure it out by yourself, you got to look around to others who can make sense of it for you. I think laying down the sword practically might be an uncomfortable moment for anybody who stepped out of the military. But I think that there's a little phase there where you're uncomfortable. That's the moment called getting context. And it's actually like homework. You can't just like shrug your shoulders and say, I used to be in the army and now I'm not, and I'm sure it'll all figure itself out. That's the homework. You're the one who has to figure it out. You're the one who has to figure out strong words like betrayal or not. And so where you're at in life right now is based on the work that you do within your life in these moments. If you brush them aside and pretend that it's not happening, that'll show up in the future as a bigger problem. And so I think that laying down the sword is, in a practical sense, a bit of a challenge, but you should be able to rapidly move through that state of mind into your next stage of life, which metaphorically never let you put down the sword. I've never put down the sword, ever. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to be in my front yard swinging this sword around this afternoon. I'm not. But in my mind, I'm still razor sharp. So that takes me to my final point. And that is, Miyamoto Musashi was perhaps one of the greatest swordsmen in history. And so at some point, he laid down his sword in context of when he used to be swinging it all day long. In his later part of life, he wasn't swinging it all day long because he was writing. He was doing calligraphy. He was an artist. He was writing his book that he didn't know he was writing at the time. And so he was still swinging a sword, I'll call it loosely, academically, though he wasn't out in a waterfall swinging a practical sword. So who you are as a young man when you're taught to swing a sword should never actually leave you, as far as I'm concerned. If you were brought up the right way, if you were taught the right way, and if you believe the right way, I don't think the sword ever gets put down.
This is fantastic, and it's going right into my next question here. I got a couple comments on the Instagram side I just want to hit on. Abstract Karma hit us up. She said, I have personally felt like changing my direction was a betrayal to myself. I told myself an untrue story. The whole I could have done better mindset kicked in, and that is a bad direction. Got to look back with honesty and true self-reflection, which I think is absolutely critical to what you're saying, Sean. And something clicked in my head earlier. Jason mentioned it, was the fact that there are lots of people that hold on to that sword long after they should have put it down. And to your point, Sean, Miyamoto Musashi could have been standing under that waterfall for another 2 or 3 years, swinging that sword, if that's what he chose to do. And I'm wondering what it is that drives us to hold on to that sword, even when the fight may no longer serve us. What do you guys think? Pat, I'm going to hit you first. What do you got?
Well, it's interesting because there are plenty of us, and I have to say, like, I've been that person in some ways. I think we all, that transition period of, when it, because for me, like, I got out medically, so that sword was basically put down for me, right? So I kind of held on to that sword in a lot of ways while I was, trying to figure out what my life was going to be and where to point that sword next, because um, we do identify a lot with the organizations that we're with. Like, I thought I was going to be a soldier for life, and that changed. So sometimes it's forced upon you, and sometimes it's your own mindset that kind of can hold you in that place. And I think that's fine. You can, there's a transition period, and it has to happen. The growth is when you actually identify it, that I have to put it down within, for that particular organization, and decide where I'm going to point it next. Because all those tools and all those things that we learned in these organizations have given us so many tools and strength to put this towards civilian life. I think that soldiers, for the most part, I kind of find it a weird paradigm that, we have, and I don't know their personal struggles, but like, we have a lot of veterans that are really struggling, but we've been given so many tools and we have such a good mindset, and we've been part of good teams and good organizations. We can redirect that into something beautiful, and our own personal pursuits. And holding on to a military mindset, is a good thing. It's when it becomes toxic. You know what I mean? There's almost a point where for some people it becomes toxic, and it's the only thing that they are or were, and they hold on to it. It's no different than that high school, quarterback that won the state championships, and he's 50 years old and he doesn't stop talking about it. That is a toxic place to live and be part of your mindset. So
Toxicity is a great angle to hit this from. Jason, what do you got?
Yeah, that is a good angle. And kind of just to keep going with what he was saying, I think that, like I said earlier, that that a lot of people make whatever it is, the reason for carrying the sword, whatever that is for them, it's their identity. And I think that's what leads to a lot of the, I don't want to put it down, because I don't know anything else. I don't know what to do without a sword in my hand. But then you go back and you walk around the village and it's like, hey, does anybody looking for somebody with a sword? And it's like, no, we're not. Sorry. But hey, what else can you do? And so you look at the skills that you developed, kind of like you were saying just a minute ago, is we've all seen the meme, the infantry guy that's getting out of the military and he's putting his skills on the job application, and one of them is biohazard, decontamination. There's a bunch of fancy words with it, and it's really, I know how to mop a floor. So it's like, it's one of those things that and you think they're silly because they teach you those things. What can I put on a job application and how does it apply? Well, you think about it. Well, while I was carrying my sword, I learned how to sharpen a sword. I may not be able to get to carry it, but that's one of the skills that I learned, and maybe somebody needs their sword sharpened, to kind of use a little bit of that analogy. But really, it truly is to look at it and say, okay, what skills did I get out of it that were outside of the actual craft of what I was doing. And I think that helps because it kind of pulls you back towards that identity. But it's more practical for where you're at, and it will be easier to say, okay, I think I can make that decision. And sometimes it takes longer than others. But it's once you realize that you're valued in a different way, but it still pertains somehow to what you were doing, even if it's as a hobby. Sometimes maybe that's all you can do is go out and find a way to do whatever it was as a hobby. But yeah, I think that the best thing you can do is because it was such a part of your identity, is how can I let go of it without feeling that ego crush, that's not who I am anymore, which that's all you've ever known. So, and that's hard to let go of. I think that's what's causing a lot of the issues sometimes these days.
I think you're right. And it made me think of something as simple as polishing your boots. Like it's a pretty simple skill, but not many people out in the world know how to polish boots right now. And you could probably do pretty well if you went out there and showed some really nice shine on some shoes. Tip, you got any thoughts on this?
From what Josh and Pat was saying there as well, it's habitual. So that, remember the responsibility of when you take hold of the sword or get your weapon system, and you have that responsibility, but it's habitual. That weapon is part of you for that forever. You know what I mean? So even when it got to my, if I go even hiking on Dartmoor or whatever now, and I've got a pack in my back, it's awkward because I always had a pack in my back with my weapon, with my rifle. You know what I mean? Do I bring a walking pole now? So it's kind of like it's there, it's in my hand, but whatever. So it's habitual. So and all those things, like you said about polishing boots, everything, they're all habitual. But also what Josh said, which I really get, and the thing is all the ethos and those skills and the discipline that we've sort of like been conditioned with, they're all magical bits of kit. They're brilliant when you're in contact on the front line, but if you step back and the little thing, it's kind of that when what Josh said, like, oh, maybe there's somebody what can I do? Or how can I change or use those skills in a different way to help civilian lives? And that's exactly it. So everything gets blended or fused back into civilian life. And it's a positive thing. And that's where I think people struggle with it. They've got these habits, they can't break those habits, but they can't do the fusion back into it. I mean, there's certain things like, the right time, right place. What do you want me to dress up as? That's exactly what an actor needs. That's exactly what, a first attender needs. That's exactly a first responder needs. It's exactly what, every part of the help society, you got to be there. Right time, right place. What do I have to wear? All these things, simple things, discipline, one thing it is, but there's little things you can discreetly do it. I mean, I personally, I never ever buy a pair of shoes that I can't break contact in. Why am I doing that? Why is it? And that's like from days doing covert work and everything else. And I'm going, what's the point of wearing a pair of shoes if you go outside and it's wet and you fall on your ass and you're in contact? It's shit. I never buy a pair of shoes that I can't break contact in. And I still do it now. Why do I need to break contact? I'm an actor, for God's sake. But there's just little things you go, no, because that'll keep me safe. If something happens and I have to get somewhere quickly or go cross country, I know I'll do it because I have the right footwear on. But they're all little things that I've got from when I had the sword. I don't have the sword now, but all those habits, if we can fuse them and get them into our support for society, then it makes it magical. If we don't do that, or if we miss those habits so much that that's what we're holding on to, then we don't fuse, then I think that's why I see my friends struggling.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I actually got a comment here on the Instagram side. Annie Oakley jumped in. She says, I resonate with responsibility, accountability, and carrying the sword. I won't betray myself anymore. I will do my best every day. My sword is now modeling my best for my own health and kids. And I think goes along with what you're saying there, Tip. And I'm loving this, where this is going. Sean, what do you got on this?
So I agree with the statement. What drives us to keep holding the sword even when the fight may no longer serve us, how we've covered that. But I want to change the word holding to clinging, which I think is more appropriate for what we're all kind of talking about. And that's pretty typical. What I see a lot of veterans is they will cling to the sword, whether it's serving them well or not. And so I'll propose a scenario. A veteran has just recently got out of the military and doesn't know what to do with themselves because they're not in that liminal space between was actively serving and is now a civilian. That liminal space, they don't reflect and consider what they want to do in the next phase of their life. So they will cling to the past. They will cling to a weapon. And so they'll get out of the military. Now, as a veteran, they're going to spend all day, every day, polishing a rifle or shooting on a civilian range because they haven't assigned something else. They haven't taken that liminal space, that moment to think, what's next for me? And if you're not thinking what's next for me, then you're going to replace what's next for me with what did I used to do? And so you'll always have a rifle in your hands. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. What I am saying is if you go from rifle to rifle to rifle to rifle, you're never exploring the bigger world around you, the bigger world inside of you. You're simply clinging to the sword rather than holding a sword. And those are two different words, important difference. So next thing I'd like to say is Tip was talking about the right footwear. And I love that, man, because I've got the same mindset. It's not that I'm running around in brogues on a wet Edinburgh street or out in the Dartmoor area, which is beautiful, by the way, for hiking, Dartmoor. Whatever footwear you're wearing, if you're thinking as Tip thinks, that's good. But it's only good if you reflect on why you're thinking that. And so there's a thoughtful consideration of these are the kind of footwears that I like. And then there's a non-thoughtful of this is just what I do. And if all you're thinking is this is just what I do, you're missing the opportunity to think more about who you are and why you're thinking that way. That's called reflection. That's called introspection. And you'll learn way more about yourself and life and all those around you if you take that footwear moment and consider, why am I thinking about these things rather than just thinking about them and not thinking about it? So the footwear might seem like not a big deal, but to me, it's a big deal. It's a milestone moment where you should be more deeply considering, why am I thinking this way?
I love the question why. I ask myself that quite a bit about it, pretty much everything nowadays, since Sean has poked me enough to make me do that all the time. And I think it's a really fascinating aspect of this, in that how we do one thing is how we do everything, right, Sean? And I think the key of this applies to everything else. Now, we've been talking about, our own personal, how do we deal with putting down the sword? Should we? Does it actually have an aspect to it, et cetera, et cetera? But I'm wondering, what does it take? We've all experienced our transitions now. We've all gone through the time periods of moving on with our lives. What does it take to make peace with the parts of ourselves that still desire that conflict? Like we all still kind of want to fight. That's why we point our sword somewhere else. What does it take to come to terms with that, to make peace with that? What do you guys think? Sean, I'm going to hit you first this time. What do you think?
Sure. So my very first thought as you're asking the question was, maybe as a young man, I had a lot of fight in me. At 61, I've probably got less fight in me, but I still got lots of fight. And that doesn't mean that I want to be violent all the time. I mean, I do love martial arts, so there's that. But when I was over in Thailand, I was exposed to a lot of Buddhism. And, the general theme being that they'd rather seek peace than war. They'd rather be cool than violent. And so the more you get exposed to the world, the more you get exposed to broad-minded thinking, I think the more you can come to peace with the parts of yourself that are ready for conflict. It's not that I'm hot-headed. I'm pretty quick to make decisions. And when I make my decision, I'm pretty quick to act on that decision. But that doesn't mean that I'm constantly seeking conflict. It just means that I think fast, I act fast. But that's not something that I'm like really proud of. It's just part of who I am. And it's my job to figure out how to not manage it, but how to do it better and better as the years go by. And so I'm pretty regularly seeking to understand myself through the external world and internal world and be a better version of myself. So young Sean, we'll call him maybe a little hot-headed, is not as hot-headed as old Sean. And if I was still as hot-headed as I was when I was young, that'd be a freaking problem. It would mean that I'd been trapped in the past. I hadn't evolved. And I'd be bummed right now as an old man, generally speaking, if I was still thinking like a 20-year-old. That would suck. I'd be annoyed with myself. But I don't feel that way. I feel like over the decades, I've evolved. And so I've kind of made peace with a variety of different parts of myself. Though I'm ready for conflict, I'm not seeking conflict quite as much as I used to when I was a young man.
Interesting. Tip, you got any points to add?
Well, from what Sean said there, he said over decades, you become that more rounded, and it's all life experience, it's depth, it's education, it's keeping those blinkers off. And even though you're in the services, you're keeping it wide. So you're always looking thing. And in a way, even though people might say, were we lucky or were we unlucky? The fact is we did deploy to very extreme places on this planet. You know what I mean? Where culturally it was completely different. People were struggling, people were starving, people were killing each other. You know what I mean? We've had these experiences, so we have had our blinkers open and seen these things for real, not on TV. We've seen it for real and touched the blood, touched the sand, and touched these people. So we've got all these experiences. So we've had our blinkers open. So we've had that, not from that, from when we joined up. This is the seasoning that we've had, and the education we've had right to the end. For me, the old putting the sword down, I thought when I said, right, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to become an actor. I'm going to tell stories. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to educate, entertain, do what I have to do. But a couple of my closest friend said, I don't think you should. I don't think you should do that. I think maybe you should just go do the the seamless transfer into the reserves, so that you're not leaving. Really, you're just going to the reserves, but it frees you up, and you do it. And I was like, well, hold on a second. I've been in the Marines for 30 years. I'm good. I've done it. I've got the badge, got the T-shirt, got everything. But she said, I think you should do that. And I did. I joined the reserves. And within 2 weeks of starting my actor training, I went, ooh, I needed that. And it was a very, very wise thing. So for me to give up the sword, it had to be a steady process. So for the next 7.5 years, I was in the reserves. So I was still moving forward, getting the blinkers off, moving forward with my new career. But at the time, I could still step back, still be part of it, still pick the sword up, still deliver training, still help people. And I needed that. And I think that helped me in my transition. So the sword, and like I say, me and the sword, we've parted company now officially, but it's not. It's always there. It is always there. But I needed that. For me, it was the old, rather than I'm all about breaking contact. Rather than breaking contact there and just getting away, it's just gradually, let's just take it slowly and get away from the fight as such. And the reserves really helped me with that. And that's why I'd any a person in the armed forces, if they come to that, whether they're obligated and they have to go through the reserve process. If they don't, I'd still go through the reserves, because it's always there if you need it, just to step back into it to help you. Sort of like, it's a bit of a dynamic move. You step back into it, you're part of it, but then you've got more energy moving forward with your new destiny. And I thought that helped me a lot.
I like that. It's like a 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You kind of always have one boot on. You never really take that off. I really like that. Jason, what are you thinking?
Well, coming to peace with it, I think for me was the literal meaning of peace. Because one of the issues I know I had and still deal with sometimes, which is, you kind of look at other people and you think, well, how can you be so normal? How can you exist in this peace? I've never known that, right? It's always chaos. And I think that's where, some of these issues develop is being able to take that step back and say, okay, it's okay that everything's okay. Because I think that's part of it, which is we crave that. It's kind of what we were talking about earlier. I think we enjoy it. We thrive in that environment. And so why am I thinking this way? Like what Sean said is when you look at all the things that you look at and say, okay, shoes or exits or just analyzing an environment. I got accused by my wife all the time of being too postured when we're at a social gathering. But it's just the way we are. And I think that's because you look around and say, how can everyone be so calm and so peaceful? Because it just doesn't seem right. Even though it's not necessarily a bad thing. So, like analyzing our environment and being able to look around and go, okay, because we do that, right? It's like, I need to blend in. I need to be, what is my environment telling me that I need to do? Whether it's the way I speak or the way I act. But then we move into that next phase of our life and we look at it and say, you analyze the environment instead of assimilating and saying, okay, this is the new normal. We look at it as if it's a bad thing. So, that's the being okay with that peace for me is the way I look at it. Is how do I come to peace with it? Is look at it and say, this is okay. It's okay, and we're all okay. My brother, he didn't have a very hard time with it. He did quite the opposite. He got out of the military and grew his hair out and became this world traveler. Going on adventures and into just the unknown. I remember one time we talked on the phone and he says, I'm going to Guatemala. And I said, cool, where are you staying? What are you doing? He said, I don't know. I bought a ticket and I'm going to Guatemala. I said, dude, you're going with no plan. To me, that was so foreign. It's like, well, you gotta have an idea of what you're doing, right? No, just going. That's the way he is. And it didn't take him very long to get that way. So, it's so for everybody, it's different. And for me, I know that's the thing I struggled with the most. It was everything feels wrong when everything's going great. It feels wrong. I guess that's the best way I can describe it. And that's hard to get through for a lot of people. I know it was for me.
I agree, and I love the way you put that. It's okay that everything feels okay, because when you stop and think about it, especially when you're overseas, if everything seems to be working, that's not a good sign. Like if your plan is working flawlessly, you're walking into a trap. That's all. That's the only thing you can say. But that's a great point to bring up. I love this, Pat. What are you thinking?
I think that all of us that are talking right now, like we're always ready we're ready for conflict, and we can turn it on and off. We're capable of conflict, and I think that we've learned and adapted and morphed into someone that knows when and where to turn that on, and we're allowed to let that be dormant, at a in a sense in our psyche and part of us. I think accepting that, and I think being at peace with that is accepting the fact that that is who you are, that is what you are. You're capable of violence, you're capable of conflict, you're ready to turn it on and you're ready to turn it off, and the transition happens as you get out of the military to learn where that is, right? Because, I mean, I'm a photographer now. I mean, I like making art. It was funny because I was going to point my sword at the police. I wanted to join the police force. I went through the whole process, and their mentality was the fact that I was too capable of violence, right? And so I ended up not getting onto my training, and then I eventually lost interest because I picked up a camera and I went down the art road, and I love taking pictures. Someone tries to take my camera from me, I'm capable of conflict very quickly. So it's being comfortable with that and being understanding of how, that's part of your person. That's who you are. You were drawn to the sword, you picked up the sword, you're capable of violence, you're capable of conflict, but you don't always have to have it turned on. And I think that comes from wisdom. And I think it also comes from the teachings of like all the warriors that came before us, whether it's within philosophy or mythology, like the Odyssey or whatever. This has been a thing from the first time an actual sword was picked up, right? Guys went to war, they did war, they came back, they had to become farmers and build their village, and they had to be comfortable with that. And I'm sure some people have all different degrees of that transition, but I think it will happen if you are mindful.
You bring up an excellent point in the fact that the idea of a professional soldier is not that old. Actually, for many, many, many millennia prior to, let's say, the last, I don't know, what do you think, 400 or 500 years, something like that, we haven't had professional soldiers. We've been farmers and blacksmiths and whatever, and we would pick up spear and go off to war. There were very few professional soldiers. It was usually a higher class level or whatever. But that's a really interesting point. I'm digging where we're taking this. I got a
chance.
Yeah,
can I jump on that real quick? Because I'd like for Azal to explore that just a little bit more. That's a fascinating point that, for millennia, warriors would reintegrate back into the village in a way that was maybe healthier than it is now. And here's my thought. Because the village was quite small and the village was very interdependent. If you did your job well, that was good. If you did your job poorly, the village suffered. And so small villages required a warrior to come back in and reintegrate into village life as an integral part of the village. Now, let's flash forward to professional armies or the career as a professional soldier today. When you reintegrate back into the village is millions of people, not just a couple of hundred in a small medieval village. And so there is no real interdependency. There is no real full integration back into the village rapidly because you're required to rapidly reintegrate. And so we've got this period of time now that is very different than 500-600 years ago, which is really a big part of the struggle. So I'm curious what you guys think about that.
You're asking my questions for me. I'm loving this. You can take over the job anytime. Tip, what are your thoughts on this? Oh, sorry, I got you muted. Hold on a sec.
Oh,
there we go. You're good. Go for it.
You're Captain Kirk. You've got the controls, haven't you? So I'm just out. Just got all these spooky images out there. We could do a good drama on that actually. But right, so with me it was the foundation, sort of like the framework of society were the small villages and everything. They grew up. It was tribal. There was all these things that I mean, it was land grabbing as well. Maybe things that may be happening in the world at the minute as well. But the fusion back into our society, the things I've struggled with it was that I think Josh mentioned it as well, where it's good to be okay. So everyone's just gone, why are they all right? And then that realization, when you come back and you're a professional soldier, when really you have been representing your community, your government, your country, your life, everything. That's why you're fighting. That's what you're fighting to protect for. So when you come back into it, sometimes when our younger people were coming back, they were looking back into what they were fighting for, and they really, really struggling because they're going, they don't give a fiddler's arse about what we're doing and the blood and guts that we're spilling to support their freedoms. They don't care. They don't openly. And it used to be nice to look at them. They're going, they're all worried about their mobile phone getting charged, or why is there a queue in McDonald's or something? You know what I mean? And I just thought, they do not give a fiddler's arse. And that was a really, really painful and hard thing. And I think that's where the fact is we considered, rather than we looked at it as professional soldiers, I don't think we are. We're still representatives of our tribe, of our government, of our people. And we're doing it because we've come from, as best we know it, from free democratic countries who who are elected to make us do what we do on their behalf, of our people's behalf. So it's still very much that tribal thing, but it's just in front of my eyes. Sometimes I don't see that they actually care.
Yeah, it's a challenge too, especially when you come from perhaps an environment that is more patriotic, perhaps. There's this kind of like drive to, I want to serve, I'm going to be part of this team, I'm going to be this, and then you go to another area and you see what life is like outside of that, or you live in a different way, not more austere way, and you come back and you see the bounty that is the Western world. It's a very difficult transition. I'm 100% on board with that. Pat, what are you thinking?
Well, yeah, and I think Tip said a lot of like important things there. Is that, like, we volunteered and served on behalf of our countries. And I mean, I live in the Lower Mainland in Vancouver, BC, and if you don't feel more outside of the societal group than coming back as a soldier in this area, it's painful. I'll literally say it's painful. And I think that's one of the reasons that, going back to the beginning of the conversation, that we cling to the sword, right? Because you're so outside of society's views of what you did and what you served as, because there is a patriotic and service to being in the military. And when no one recognizes that or gives it any value, that's painful. And I think that's what sometimes drives us to that, holding on to the sword, or clinging to the sword, as Sean put it. Because, and we really want to only hang out with vets, and we only want to hang out with other soldiers, and we want to like stay in that environment and that ecosystem, because we don't know how to integrate ourselves. And I guess I'm okay with it, because I feel like a lot of times I'm introverted and I'm a bit of a lone wolf, and so I've been able to be very comfortable with it. They don't have to understand me. I did what I did. I was part of society. I was part of all that. I've laid down my sword. Now I'm pursuing art. I'm okay with that, and I think that's a true internal struggle, and I think everybody's journey is going to be different on that. But because I started that journey before I left the military, I've always been into that sort of thing, the meditation and being mindful, and developed more and more, especially as I got into special operations and stuff like that. Because we had to integrate it with civilian populations and stuff like that while we're doing our job. So I'm okay being like a ghost, kind of going through society, and I make good civilian friends and stuff like that, and I've integrated at this point. But that's taken years, and it wasn't an easy thing to just lay down the sword per se. Like there was a part of me that really wanted to cling on to it, but I knew that wasn't a healthy thing.
It for some it can be a healthy thing, but I think only if it's done correctly. As Tip was saying earlier, right? Like if you manage that transition from reg force to the reserves and then kind of out, it allows you to let it go over time. But a lot of people kind of like drop it and run and go, oh no, what do I do now? And start reaching for it. It's a tough transition throughout. Jason, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think that I'm kind of the same way. It took me a long time to be okay with it, because when we talk about it as far as a culture, kind of like what you said earlier, is it's been a long time since we were as a as our country that we were we would potentially be directly affected by the outcome. And we could argue that all day long about directly affected, but using the village analogy, and the warrior was, if they come over that mountain and defeat our army, then we're all going down. So it's that direct effect. And so I think that, you look at that and say, okay, I think people should be more concerned with what type of effects, that would have on their daily life. But also just, it took me a long time and again, several years to be okay with that. That's the lens I was viewing it through. You talk about patriotism and we talk about all these buzzwords and things that we get so wound up about, and how come you don't stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance or so, all these things. And it's like, well, this is the lens in which I'm viewing it, because this is where I came from. This is my background. This is the things that I did. And I think that has a lot to do with it culturally. I think it's because of the lack of the direct effect. And I don't think, I know that you can look at it and say, I've met more people that are supportive of those who put down the sword and those who carry the sword, than I have. You see a lot more on TV, maybe, that don't. But in daily life, I think I've met way more people that do. And so you kind of have to look at it that way too, is just because you don't say something, we kind of get caught in that trap in culture these days, which is, if you choose to abstain from supporting something, it means you don't. Well, what do you mean you don't have an opinion on that? Well, I don't, and this is the way it is. So I think that leads us down that road of the where the culture is, as far as, well, I think there's a lot more support for the sword carriers and the warriors, as opposed to, the analogy of the village, which was, you came back and you assimilated and you became part. Number one, everybody was proud because they got to go on with their daily life, but also you had to fill in the job that already existed before you went. I think that look back across history, that may have made it easier. But these days you just kind of come back, or you get out of whatever it is that you're doing, and you think people don't support you, but it's only because they're not necessarily jumping up to help you out. And for us, with coming from that team mentality, that's what you're looking for, is someone to say, hey, let me walk you through the door and let me show you, because it's hard for me. I go back to something I was thinking of earlier, which was, I think one of the hardest things for us when we get out is when your entire adult life, you've been told what to wear, what time to be there, and what to do. It makes it hard. And so when you get done and you think, well, there's going to be somebody to tell me what to do, and there's not. But there's still the support there, I think. And it's definitely getting a lot better, even since I got in. So I think we're equipped to kind of answer the question. I think we're there. I think it's just a matter of a personal opinion of what help do I think I deserve, and and how can I help myself through that process to meet everyone else at a level of where they feel like they can help me. Because the other thing culturally is, some people look, what it takes to be a warrior, to be a sword carrier, is not necessarily looked at as a good thing for some people. So they think, well, if you've got that mentality, if you're that type of person, then there's no way you're going to fit in with everybody else. But then going back to what we said earlier, it's well, how about all these other things that I am good at because of that mentality? I think that's where you kind of look at it is am I preparing myself to be accepted by the culture?
I like this because it dives into this concept of like binary thinking. You're either with us or you're against us. It's not like there's a broad spectrum of analysis to be able to put into anything. And I think that's a very important point of this, is that the moment we get into all or nothing, it leads down a very negative road 100% of the time. John, you got any thoughts on this?
I do. I had an incident, not an incident. I had an occurrence when we were landing back in Canada just the other day. We were in the customs lineup, and there was a couple of goofs. And I use that term like strongly, goofs. Two dudes that didn't know each other. And we were in a lineup. The lineup wasn't moving fast enough for them, apparently. And so they started chirping about how Canada sucks and, you know, it's this guy's fault and it's that guy's fault. And they started talking politically and they started talking socially and they started talking culturally. And everything was everyone's problem and except their problem. And like I put up with it for a while, listening to these two goofs run down Canada, run down everything. And as I was looking at them, they had the general markers of entitlement. I mean, the one guy was in his Hawaiian shirt and his, you know, he's got all the trappings of luxury, we'll call it. And as I read him, and this is being judgmental, but that's what I was taught to do pretty well. As I read him, I thought, man, you haven't seen a hard day in your life. That's what I thought. And so that's exactly what that guy needs, is a hard day in his life to get context of how frickin' entitled he is. And so I put up with their nonsense for a while. And then eventually I said, hey, what are you talking about right now? Stop running down Canada. It's a pretty good country and you're lucky to live in it. And if you're not a citizen, then you're lucky to visit it. That's all I said. And so these two guys started chirping. And I said, hey, have either of you two dummies ever served your country in any fashion other than serve yourself? And the one guy, like, his jaw hit the ground and all he could do was because he didn't know what to say. Because he'd never been challenged that way before, I don't think. So my point is this, that culturally, we're supposed to help other people understand that the free ride that they're on had cost, and that their sense of entitlement is skewed as compared to other parts of the world. These two goofs were tired of standing in a line for more than 2 minutes, but I don't think they'd seen a hard day in their life. And I just come out of a country where, you know, the average salary per month is about $300. And when citizens of Canada talk about how tough it is, they're scraping by because they can only afford a steak once a week or twice a week. There's countries out there, of course, that they'll never see steak in their life. And so life is context. And so I took the opportunity to give those two goofs some context. If you're not challenging the people around you to shake their head and get a new thought in their head, then we're letting it all slide. It's all backsliding. The work that I did back in the day as a soldier, if I would have just shrugged my shoulders in that moment and let them run down Canada, then I was kind of being disrespectful to my own work, to my friends' work, to the current work that is being done on behalf of the country. And it goes back to what Pat said, and that is the distinction between the sense of entitlement, maybe in the Lower Mainland, and people who have done really hard work, sacrificed a lot on behalf of those citizens who are enjoying their Starbucks latte every day. It's our job to tell that story, I feel. And so now I'm going to round it out with my final point. And it's about Tip and Sunray. These are the kind of things, based on the trailers that I've seen online so far, these are the kind of movies, the kind of opportunities for soldiers and veterans, people who have served, people who have a broader understanding of the world. It's things like that that need to be put out to the general public in order for people to understand what is being done on their behalf, which I feel is not explained very well at all. So if you have the opportunity as a veteran to get someone to shake their head, I'm not saying you've got to do it strongly, but help someone understand that, bro, your life is pretty good right now for the following reasons, ... I think we should take that opportunity whenever we can.
I really like where this is going, and it made me think of Remembrance Day. Actually, is the interesting part about here in Canada versus the U.S. as well as the U.K. You know, you have Remembrance Day, which is it's a big deal. There's a lot of pomp. There's a lot of reflection. Slowly, that tradition has been kind of simmering off, at least in Canada that I've seen. There's less people at the ceremonies. There's less work put into the parades and so on and so forth. You know, we saw some interesting things this last November, but I think that really focuses on the lost versus those that are carrying on. And the one thing I like about in the US is they have Memorial Day and Veterans Day, is that there's a distinction between that, in that there's a day to remember the fallen, and there's a day to remember that there are people still walking amongst us. And I think it's a key thing. So my question on that is, how do we as a society preserve and respect those contributions from everybody that's gone around and fought, but also encourage growth past the sword, to be able to look at it as a almost as a rite of passage, right? To be able to come pick up the sword for a little while and then place it down, or pass on the torch, perhaps. What do you guys think? Jason, I'm gonna hit you first. What do you got?
You say that about Memorial Day and Veterans Day, but there's a lot of people that you know, being from Canada, you were able to describe it very well. Not a lot of people can. That at least the difference between the two, they know they're important, and they're kind of remembrance, almost the same. But yeah, it's kind of funny that you ask a lot of people, and they're like, "Yeah, I don't know. We get the day off, and they're important." So I think it has to do with veterans, but I'm not sure. So I think, you know, we were talking about it earlier. The storytelling. I think one of those things is one of my favorite things to do is my grandfather is well into his 80s, is sit down and listen to those stories, and anyone who's been there, and you know, when you talk about preserving, I think that's the most important thing is you know, a lot of people kind of have turned it into a joke that, you know, you go into special operations and then you get out and you write a book and kind of go through that whole process. But I think that, you know, done correctly, the preserving in anybody, it doesn't necessarily have to be. I've read a lot of good books from guys who were not supposed to be in the situation where they weren't even ready for it. You know, and heard a lot of good stories, because it's the human experience, right? And I think that those, as they continue on, whether it's through movie or text or whatever, you know, the you know, like a book, I think that's the biggest piece of but you know, of preserving that stuff. But I think also the newer generations don't get exposed to it. You know, as we were talking about earlier, is the exposure. I think it was Sean that was talking about. You know, I used the example earlier of people not standing for the Pledge of Allegiance or something like that. You know, it ticks me off, and I want to educate that person. But then you kind of take a step back and think, well, do they know the customs and courtesies of how to properly hang the flag? Do they know you know, all these things that come along with this patriot, this word patriot? You kind of wonder, where are we missing that? And where can we address it? So I think it's, you know, it's the education, it's the storytelling, it's the making it a part of the culture, like we were talking about earlier. I think that, you know, you look back across some of the most patriotic groups and civilizations. I think that it was a patriotic cult. I think it would just, you know, being part of a winning team, it's kind of the same thing. It's knowing that that's part of your culture. That's part of who I am and who the people before me and the people after me. I think it's all part of it. And I think that's where you kind of have to go with the preservation side of it. And I think that also leads into the encouraging growth. I think that, you know, I don't think that I could ever be an actor, but you know, you're talking about that's their way you look to tell the story. But I think that that's all part of it. I had another thought there. I was trying to loop back around to it, but I can't get it. I can't get it back. So
all good. No worries. It brings up a really, really interesting point in my. Hit the wrong button there. Sorry. It brings up a really interesting point in my head. I'm gonna figure it out, and then I'm gonna come back to you, Pat. What are you thinking on this?
It's funny we're talking about conflict and swords, and nothing makes me want to pick up a sword faster than trying to respect and honor the people that have served our country. Or it doesn't matter the society. I think it's such a thing that is we're losing it. We're losing it quickly. And I think you'd seen my Instagram post where I kind of ranted about people not even wearing poppies. And it's such a simple thing. Money goes towards the Legion to support the veterans, and it's a direct symbol of showing that respect for veterans and for those that have fought for our country. And it gets me so riled up, and I know that it riles me up in all areas, including like even when I work in film and I'm advising on a show, and they want me to make someone look like a Navy SEAL, and the time between blocking and rehearsal, which would be about a 30-minute time span, and it's like, and I understand what the character is, and I know that they can't represent a soldier properly, because this is the society shift is either we want to pretend that there's no fight, right? And that whole sheepdog versus the flock kind of mentality, right? Like, I don't want to know that there's a wolf out there, versus the almost like, and I don't want to use the word toxic again, but like this, like, I'm just a dude that has a gun and I'm going to kill everything. Well, soldiers are much more than that. And I got to work on a show recently, and it was so amazing because I worked with the directors and the writers and everything. And I was able to shape the character from what the writers originally wrote as like the typical guy that gets out of the military and he's still wearing his issued Gore-Tex boots, and he's like, he's hard as last year's Christmas candy. And it's like he wrote him as a special operator. Yeah, I mean, this guy's like a refined human, and he's very smart, and he contributed to to his world and what he's doing as a hero in this show. Like, you can't take that role. And I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but uh, I think that I guess it comes back to society. They just see a lot of times, and I mean, my vision could be slightly skewed because I live in a very interesting part of the world, that they just see us as warmongers. We're just violent people. We're warmongers. No, we contributed a lot. And I made a post once on Remembrance Day. I said, even if you're not into war and you're not into this sort of thing, I said, realize that, like, as soldiers, like, we are the first ones to be called out on floods, ice storms, search and rescue. We're doing things domestically to make your lives better every day. We're not just pipe hitters, and we're not just just running around with like massive violence. We contribute to this whole world, and I think the education comes into it, because I remember in my social studies class, like when, and I mean, I'm dating myself, but that was in the 90s, we went over Victoria Cross winners, which is very similar to Medal of Honor winners. And we talked about how they earned that and what happened to get that recognition. And I don't know if they're even doing that sort of thing anymore, because, like you said, Chance, like, there's not a lot of people showing up at ceremonies and stuff like that anymore. And it's a very simple thing to take a moment to reflect on how we contributed by picking up that sword for everyone.
Yeah, I do classes, schools in the neighborhood and stuff like that. My kid's school asked me to come out and speak during Remembrance Day and so on and so forth. And those interactions with the kids now, for me, that's kind of my new sword. Same with the collective, is that these are the things that I now see as the next fight. I gotta defeat apathy. I gotta defeat all that other stuff. And I think it's a huge point to bring up. Tip, what are you thinking on all this?
All the things that this is very, very close to my heart. So I'll put down three words. I put down patriotism as the first one, because obviously I think you said Jason's going to go off with, to start with. It's just the patriotism and the thing, but things like flags and symbols and songs and things like that, like national anthems now, they mean a lot to a lot of people, but they're also very, I'm an Irishman, aren't they? Remember, but they're very, very they can be very, shall we say, it's not inclusive, it's exclusive, you know what I mean, for different sectors of communities, especially being an Irishman. So, but I thought about it, patriotism is important, but I think it's more for, not for the country or for the flag or for the songs or for that, for that, that aspect, but for the culture, for the people that there, for the generations of the people that fought for that culture, for what it is and the way you move forward, and for those freedoms, the freedoms that we've got. And it's hard sometimes to look at it because we're for generations and generations and generations, people like us have been fighting to protect those freedoms that people really, really do take for granted. And we said it, I think, earlier on that the freedoms, they're not free, are they? They are at the cost of blood and treasure to all of our people, and our armed forces is massive. In fact, it's not just massive; it's the ultimate sacrifice. And there's no job that you do that. You know what I mean? So that's the freedom. So it's about human beings, and it's about the people we serve, left and right of us. That's it. They're the magic, and people have been doing that for generations in different wars. And it's those people, and it's all about the people left and right of them, and done it. You know what I mean? It's not for the officer in charge, was it? But he's the leader, and all. There's all these things that it's always about human beings and the importance of, which is like it is now with me as an actor. It's about human beings. So it's the stories. The best stories, it's not about the hardware, it's about the people. And it's the people that generate the stories. It's the bravery is done by the people, not by the hardware. It's by the people. So it's all about human beings. It's really important for me to make sure that I know how valuable this is. And maybe the obvious sort of nature where people aren't maybe thinking about when it comes to it's like, say, remembrance for me, like in the poppy, and how important it is and how sacred that is. My most sacred day of the year is Remembrance Sunday. And I think, and we've got to have this in our cultures that we fought for. We should have in school, this should be set. This is not like religion. This is not like, because, education's evolving all the time, but things about remembrance and those lessons that you learned before, Pat, and things like that, they're the important things. They're the important things purely just to honor human beings that sacrificed everything to give us the wonderful culture that we're allowed, we've got all these freedoms for. So I think it should be mandated, and very discreetly. It doesn't have to be like shoved down people's throats, but it should be there at every level, but it should be recorded that it's achieved and that people understand it. And I think that not only in schools, but in a community sort of aspect, and even in a family aspect. Like you say, you sit down, it's generational, you listen to the stories, and it's all important. But I think to keep, and I hate sort of like saying, right, well, you have to sort of like remember doing this, but it's just, if you discreetly do it, but it's done and it's stipulated in education that people understand what remembrance is about. And it's not warmongers, it's not this, it's about, it's just valuing the human beings that your community is.
I love the fact that you brought up, the symbols, the flags, the anthems, the things like that. And because I was having this discussion earlier with my massage therapist, is that, a lot of the people, we sign up for those symbols, right? We join those organizations in order to serve the nation and the public. And really what it comes back down to is, though, it's your community. You want to serve the people that you see every day. And you're like, man, you know what? I feel, at least this is the way I felt, was that it was my duty to give back to what I had, which was quite a lot, even though I grew up pretty poor, but I had lots of freedoms. And seeing Afghanistan comparatively to my neighborhood when I grew up, it's a big difference, right? And I think this is it's an important piece of this, that we are really serving our communities more so than we're serving that flag, but that flag represents those communities. And I love that point. Sean, what do you got?
I think that that is an important aspect of it. When I joined up in 1983, I didn't have as well or as big of an understanding of what I was doing at that time as I do now. And so in 83, the framework of service wasn't as fully discussed as it is now. And by fully discussed, I mean like there was nobody on a podcast talking about service. So just this simple act that we're doing right now, I would have appreciated hearing this podcast in 1982. And so I think that that's the crux of it for me when it comes to preserving and respecting the contributions of those who fought. It is our responsibility to help not educate, but help add voice to the conversation that isn't occurring as often as it should. Here's what I think. The conversations of today are constrained because no one wants to feel uncomfortable. The uncomfortable topics that need to be discussed won't be discussed in school, won't be discussed in society because it's uncomfortable. And uncomfortable things nowadays occur less than they should, I believe. There is this narrowing of exposure to even thought adversity. And so, Pat, in high school, in social studies, being educated on matters that probably aren't discussed today. And coincidentally, Pat and I went to the same freaking high school, I believe, in Grand Cache. And so I recall, hearing things similar to that, but I'm not sure that that's happening today in Grand Cache High School as the example. I feel that as a whole, society is having a narrowing of adverse thought constructs. It's a poor choice of words, but I think it gets the spirit of it across.
I think you're accurate in the narrowing of the understanding of challenge, of difficulty. And this is something that I've noticed in schools kind of across the board that I've gone to chat with for Remembrance Day, is that a lot of the students have never met a soldier before. They don't understand what it was to go to Afghanistan. They don't understand what that's like in the military. And to a small degree, growing up, we had all the people, Rambo and John Wayne and all those standards that we could look to. And when I was in high school, I got a couple Victoria Cross winners and things like that explained to me. My social studies teacher was a veteran as well, so that was part of it. But I, at least in my mind, now that we have all evolved from actively wielding the sword, I think now it's our responsibility. I think it falls on us to pass on that level of understanding. And I think that more veterans need to, instead of standing up and saying, hey, I'm a veteran, why is nobody lauding me? I think we need to start going into, not just walking into schools, but like going through the proper process, but get into the schools, talk to the kids, tell them what it was like. One of the things that I bring up in my conversations is what it's like in the Army. I ask the kids, hey, who here knows how to tie their shoes? And, all the hands come up and I'm like, in the Army, you don't. We're going to teach you how. Who here knows how to fold their sheets? And some of their hands up. I'm like, no, you don't. It's wrong. We're going to do it a different way. I think that's part of it, is to get them to kind of grasp that what they think they know, they don't really know. What do you guys think? Pat, I'm going to hit you first.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think that, going back to the storytelling kind of thing, because this just kind of just popped up into my head because you were talking about it. Like, I remember like watching like movies like A Bridge Too Far and Wild Geese and like all these like other like, it wasn't just the action movies. It's not the John Wicks where I'm just gonna freaking shoot everything up. It was about the actual like war, like World War II movies, Vietnam movies. So I mean, unfortunately for Tip, you have a large weight to carry because you're going to have to tell these stories, and we all are going to have to be able to tell these stories. And it would be interesting to see, like, there's been some really great movies recently. I can think of probably at least five. But telling these stories is super important, and we are such a visual media. I mean, we're on a video podcast, so things like movies and media do have to, I don't want to say shift, but we do have to do a good job of representing the military and representing how we contributed and what we did. I think these stories need to be told. And I mean, because there's plenty of John Wicks out there, and they're a dime a dozen. And I'm not taking anything away from that movie, but the movies like 12 Strong and 13 Hours and things like that. These are intense movies that bring you home into the real human part of the whole experience. That's my thoughts on that for now.
I love it. Jason, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I don't have much more to add on that. Basically, what Pat just said. It's kind of, well, like I said earlier, the human experience, I do it with my kids. I try to explain the necessity for it, the honor behind it, all those things that can translate over, because I think that's where the generation, right, and the younger generation right now is okay, yeah, that's great, but okay, how does that help me? Or how does that, I think there's that you said you like asking the question why, and I think it's because we understand the question why, whereas when a kid asks why, it's purely because they don't know. And I mean that in the sense that they're asking why because they don't know what's next. It's a why. It's more of like a, okay, and then what? As opposed to I'm trying to find the deeper root of what you're saying. So I think that's the understanding the big picture, the human experience, like you said, all those movies he listed, I think are absolutely great, and there's a ton of them that are that way. But it's not just the strategy. It's not just the act of war. It's the how did we get there? How did we let ourselves get to that point where this was the issue? And there's other movies that I can't think of it right now. The name of it, at least, it had very, very actual war, traditional scenes in it, but it was about the code, the people that broke the code for the
Wind Talkers.
No, I'm sorry, different one. It was the enigmatic, the scientist that broke the German code.
For the Enigma, right.
The Enigma. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Just and then stuff like that. The behind the scenes is the I'll tell you, like the scientists, the whole experience of as a in a couple of our wars, the world, how did we get to that point? What was society doing? Because I think that leads forward into not just helping preserve the people that participated. I think it helps move forward into okay, this is kind of what this looked like, and gosh, this looks a little familiar. So I think it helps in a lot of different ways, but that's, like I said, I didn't have much more to add to it, but I think that's what it is. I think it's the true understanding of what it meant and what it should mean to you. I think in that is the whole, from the bottom up, of how we got there, how we solved it, and how we moved on past it. And here's all the players that were involved, and this is why they're important. So in kind of a roundabout way, I think that's at least my thoughts on it.
Yeah. Full breakdowns are always a good thing in my mind. Tip, what are you thinking?
Well, this sort of passage of conversation there just going towards like film work and that, and with Sunray, I know it's gone back and Sean's mentioned it. With Sunray it's a journey, and the characters that we're playing, although we're all former Royal Marines, but but it's not necessarily in the film itself. It doesn't state that we're Royal Marines, so we are just veterans. I'm a soldier. I play a character who was a soldier who's done multiple operations, suffered a bit, lost everything back from it through his own mental health. He's lost his family and everything else, and that's where the sort of story begins. And then it follows a journey where it's nearly everything we were talking about today. All those things: the friendship, love, loss, sacrifice, hardship, very skilled. You know what I mean? And these are all things that we've spoke about today. But it's also it's completely, even though even if you look at the trailers, it looks quite like it is an action thriller, but it It looks like it's, it looks a bit John Wickish, you'd say, but it isn't. It is a full on, as far as I haven't seen it yet, but as far as I remember, this is about human beings. This is about all my mates that never made it back. And the lads that didn't make it back have taken their own lives. It's about their families. They'll get stuff from this because they understand what we've been through. And that's the really important thing. And that was the fundamental thing for the whole, since we decided, like, should we do something about the lads? And from there, that's what we've done. And we've managed, we've got a premiere on Leicester Square next month on the 20th of January on the red carpet in Leicester Square. So we've done all right, really, haven't we, for a bunch of Marines that just went, should we do a story about the lads? And it's going well. And it's getting released in North America, Canada on the 24th of January as well, in selected cinemas and on platforms, which are going to all come out. But my next project I'm doing, this is all the deal directly what we're talking about, is I'm creating a play about my friends that died on the helicopter in the night we were going into Iraq. And I was speaking with people and they're saying they want to do like stories about, again, maybe drawn from my life experiences. But I said, look, no, I want to do something about people that aren't here, who are some of the most incredible human beings that anyone could ever know. But they died in a nanosecond in a helicopter as we were going into Iraq. And that I'm doing it. It's a stage production, one person stage production, but I want it so that every single the memory of those of my friends, that people in the audience can nearly feel or touch their spirit when I'm telling the story, and I want them to feel it. But this is for them because those, you must admit, how many of our friends and all those generations before, they just go down and they become. I mean, I remember saying you just become a name on a wall somewhere. And my great grandfather Thomas Cullen is one of the missing on the Thiepval wall who died in the Battle of the Somme. And I've stood in a field where I think his body is somewhere that he was never found. And there's so many things that you become a name or a number, but you weren't. You were a human being. And that's why I want the storytelling for that play is to touch the souls or the feeling of those wonderful, wonderful human beings. And that to me is my sort of mission in my storytelling, because it's for us, it's for every one of us. So we're stateside, Canada, France, everywhere. This is about us. This is about through our great grandparents, our grandparents, and ourselves. We've all done it. You know what I mean? We've all been there, and I just want that's what my mission in my new career is. So if I can do that and people come and watch it, and I go to schools and give my play, one person, but I'll stand up. You need to listen to this. You need to feel these people and understand how much we've lost, how much they sacrificed by not being here. You know what I mean? And I want that there, and that's part of it. And if that just gives a little flavor, and they realize how wonderful we're not sort of gung ho warmongers. We're human beings that really do give a fiddlers. You know what I mean?
And being able to tell the story for those that aren't able to tell the stories themselves, which is such a beautiful point. I love this. Sean, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think The Wild Geese, one of my favorite movies. The reason I love that movie is because it isn't about the hardware. It's about the spirit of each man that's involved in the pivotal character roles in that movie. The movie has a slower pace to it as compared to a John Wick movie, where it's a lot about the hardware. If anyone was to sit down right now, grab a pen and paper and start writing about the character of John Wick, you wouldn't be able to write too much about him because there ain't a whole lot of backstory. I mean, there is some backstory, but the purpose of the movies, the John Wick series, is about action and about kicking that arse and about all of that good stuff. And that's cool. It's cool. Movies like that I really enjoy, but I enjoy movies like The Wild Geese more because it is the heart of the matter, the spirit of human existence. The character of a man can't be replaced by a gun.
Modern movies, certainly coming out of Hollywood anyway, are more focused on the gun than the spirit of the man. And so The Wild Geese, if anyone hasn't seen it, I'd encourage you to watch it,
because the pace of that movie allows you to connect with the spirit of each man at a deeper level than just a mag change. And so I believe that, as Tip has said, the focus has been a little more on the spirit of the journey within Sunray rather than all about the hardware. And that honestly is what, as veterans, we need to focus on, is the spirit of it rather than the mag changes of it.
Yeah. Tip, what were you going to say?
Well, because everyone's, I think we done this before in a podcast with you. It's just that things that, remember we said about it's that community. Why do we take up the sword in the first place? And one of the strongest films, two of the strongest films I got, and you think about it, I think they're still categorized as anti-war films, but they're the ones that I felt they were part of my guidance towards making my choice to become a Royal Marines Commando, and that was The Deer Hunter and Cross of Iron I spoke about earlier on. Cross of Iron, when I first seen it before being a Royal Marine out there, and it was with Germans, like, it's about Germans, but it was that bond at the section level and the bond of those and the individual characters, how they're unique. You know what I mean? I done when I was doing actor training, we done a lot of stuff with the art college here, and you get all these young people digging out blind to try and be extremely different, but it makes them all exactly the same because they're all digging out blind to be different. But when it comes to us in the Marines, we all look the same, wear the same gear, built the same, everything else that, but every one of them was so unique and individual. But you all look the same and do this, but you're not, because your trueness, the integrity of you as a human being, because you all look the same, you're different. And that's the important thing in the storytelling, is bringing the uniqueness of those individuals, like exactly what you said, Sean. And then the Deer Hunter, you've got that, I think it's that bravado. And there's a certain thing you could see in the character of Robert De Niro's one. You knew he got it. You knew he got it even before they went there. But you knew that he was obviously, he knew what he was doing. Where the other ones, it was the old, we're all on the bus, let's get amongst it, let's go and do what we have to do. And then the realities come afterwards. And unless you get it, it's gonna fuck you up, in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Potentially, both physically, and maybe later down the line. But even if you do get it, it may play with your head later on. But I'm just saying, but you have to get it. And that the Deer Hunter was just, even now, those moments in the scenes. And I think I've watched it over the years, maybe about 10, 15 times. And I still learn to see little new things in it, nuances in it. But it's an incredible bit of like film work. But for me as a soldier, it's one of the ones that's really mostly nearly on point. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The what I love the point you made there is that we are all unique, but not special when you're in uniform. And I think the people that are out of uniform want to be special and not unique. And I think that by trying to be special, you're not really unique. But if you let go of that, you can be your own self without having to be special amongst everyone else that wears the same uniform. I think this is a beautiful point. Now, we are running up on 2 hours now, and I just wanted to say thank you guys. This has been a fantastic conversation. I think more of us need to sit down and have conversations like this to be able to really understand what it is to be a veteran, what it is to be one who has maybe not put down the sword, but at least put it in its sheath for a little while, and just to be able to utilize it in a different manner. I think this is such an important thing. So thank you guys. This has been awesome. Now, I have a couple comments here, and then we're going to get some final thoughts and jump in here. We have on the Instagram side, Corbin hit us up, said, passing the means, teaching my loved ones and close friends balance situational awareness, not obsessively, but enough to understand that it's not paranoia, just a way to avoid victimization. I think it's a beautiful point. He also says it's kind of a sort of a legacy that may help us go through life, is that is the legacy we want to leave, is people being perhaps better prepared to understand. And then we got Vanessa Chaos here jumping in on the YouTube. I'm hearing there are multitude of possible swords. For example, some can use their words as swords. And from that perspective, would it not be a case of never putting down the sword, but putting one into your back pocket while moving into refining the next sword, which I really love. It's a great point. And lastly, we got Dan jumping in here. He's sort of popping in and out. You guys are so amazing. The large things that bind you all together is your integrity. I taught most of the loud and uses of force I told everyone in every classroom, you've got a lot of tools at your disposal. Holster your ego before you go to the tools. That's a good point. I like that, holster your ego. So let's get some final thoughts. Anything that we've talked about across the board, putting down the sword, the legacies afterwards. Tip, I'm going to hit you first. What do you got?
I don't know. I've really enjoyed tonight. And it's one of those conversations where possibly when we step away from it, things will jump into my head and play with it. But I think at the start I did say, "Oh, I've put down my sword and now I'm moving forward with being an actor and being a creative." But I realize that's not putting your sword down. It's exactly what we say there. It's like it's using my life experiences, my passion and love for the community I became part of. I'm moving forward with it. So that is my new sword, and yeah, I love it. So really, maybe the sword hasn't been put down, but it's just a wee bit different. That's all.
Just a wee bit different. I like that. Pat, final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I would say that remember that you're the sword carrier. You're not the sword. And if you overly obsess about the sword, that can be a dangerous thing. You are a sword carrier, and your sword can change. Like, you don't want to be, I'll use the movie, you don't want to be in Full Metal Jacket talking to your rifle and getting a little too crazy. Like, you use that weapon, or you use your new skill set or your new way of pointing your way you want to attack. The battlefield may change if you want to put it in that sense, but you will always be a sword carrier.
I like that. I really like that. Jason, what are you thinking?
Yeah, the last comment, mentioned ego, and that goes with what Pat just said. The sword carrier and not the sword. I like that, because the ego truly plays the biggest part in that, and they're learning a lot about with those of us that have or are dealing with a lot of this identity stuff when it comes to putting down the sword. That the ego is the most difficult thing to control and get past. The ego does not like to put down the sword. So, I like that. I think that's, to me, of everything we kind of talked about was put down the sword and carry on with the next mission and find a new sword. I think is kind of just summing up really what I've talked about, what we've all talked about, but definitely being able to control the ego and let it guide you through that process.
100%. Love it. Sean, final thoughts?
So this isn't going to be a final thought as like a bam, what a final thought that was. This is just a small touch on a random thought that came about because of something that Tip said earlier in the show when he was talking about Cross of Barn and how that had made him a little emotional as he was watching it on his flight back from Austria. And I had a moment like that myself not too long ago, and it was because of The Deer Hunter, the movie, which I love, by the way. And there's a scene in the movie where the background music is a classical guitar, and the piece is called Cavatina. The guitar piece is called Cavatina. And anytime I hear that song in my head, it makes me get a little emotional because of the scene in the movie. And when I watched it as a young man, I'd assigned that scene and that music, Cavatina, to almost an emotional state. And so not too long ago, I attached Cavatina as a background song to a reel that I put out while I was over in Thailand. And even as I was attaching Cavatina as a song, like I could feel it in my heart, in my soul. I was getting a little not weepy, but my eyes were starting to water up a little bit, which should not be the case, because it's not like I was in any adverse moment or there was nothing really going on around me that would have had me getting a little watery. But it's the emotion, the context of what that meant to me in that moment, and always will. And so my final point is this. If you find yourself in life so dulled or immune to your emotions that a song or a moment from the past doesn't make you feel a little emotional, make you feel a little watery-eyed, then maybe take today to think about who you were then and who you are now and why these things are or aren't happening. If you're not feeling a little weepy on occasion, or if you're feeling, I'll call it, too weepy, these are just things that you're supposed to evaluate or contextualize in your day to understand yourself a little more deeply. When my eyes were getting a touch watery listening to Cavatina, I didn't just like brush that aside and think, whatever, man. I'm not sure why that happened, but I'm just going to freaking carry on with my day. I thought about it, as I do every time. So that's my challenge to anyone out there. If you haven't felt a little watery moment recently, I'll think about why not. And if you're feeling it all the day, every day, I'll think about that as well. That's all I got to say.
Love it. I don't have a lot to add here. I just want to kind of reattach ourselves back to the beginning here in the fact that, you know, when we pick up the sword, we need to understand that we are responsible for life and death, both of those key aspects. It's not just pick up the sword and you're responsible for the death of others. You're now responsible for the lives of the people around you. And I think this is a key proponent of, or a key piece of understanding what it is to either put the sword down or sheath it or hang it up on the wall or whatever it is. If we leave it to rust, it won't be there when we need it. But if we maintain it, if we take care of things and we make sure that that rifle is oiled on the wall and actually is useful, then we can apply it to everything else we do. But if we try to just forget about it, then that leads to rust sitting on your mantelpiece, which you don't really want in my eyes. So I can't thank you guys enough. This has been just a fantastic conversation. And I know that as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we will be able to expand our vision of what it is to put down the sword. Thank y'all. We'll see y'all next week. Chimo.
Chimo.
Hey Collective, Big Bird here. Thanks so much for watching the episode. Really appreciate the support. It has been fantastic recording these and having these conversations. I can't thank you enough. If you'd like to watch any other ones, please subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to listen to another awesome convo, I got one right here. Your choice. Chimo.